This is EnRich Your Life, a podcast about financial health, all things investing, life planning, and smart decisions with Richard Leimgruber.
Hi, and welcome to EnRich Your Life Podcast. I'm your host, Rich Leimgruber, where we discuss everyday financial strategies that will help you make smarter decisions, not only for today, but in future generations. Today, we're going to be talking about all things 529 plans. And our guest is Kris Adrian. Kris Adrian is the Executive Director, serving as the National 529 Specialist for JP Morgan Asset Management. She's been with the firm for over 20 years, and in her role, Kris travels throughout the country to educate clients and advisors on college planning using college planning essentials. She started her career in 2001 as an independent advisor focused on high net worth clients and estate planning. Kris holds a BS in family financial planning from The Ohio State University. Today, we're going to be speaking about all things 529. And if you're a parent or a grandparent and you have children in your house that are going to be college bound, this is the podcast for you to be listening to. We're going to have an in-depth conversation on one of the most often misunderstood tools for education planning, which is the 529 College Savings Plan. Without further ado, I want to welcome Kris, and we're so grateful to have you and have this very important conversation with you. So thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. Very excited to talk about this.
Yeah, I'm sure you're very well versed on 529 plans and all things about it. So I can't wait to have this great discussion. So I always love to give all of our listeners the ability to give us a little bit of background on how you got to where you are today. So do you mind sharing a little bit about how you are sitting right here today at the EnRich Your Life Podcast?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay.
So it actually stems back to my grandmother. My grandmother just passed, unfortunately, last year.
I'm sorry.
But she was 105 years old when she passed. So she had this beautiful life, but full of education. So she was actually a school teacher in a little one-room schoolhouse. And then as she had us, as she had grandkids, she always instilled in us that gift of education, that power of education. And she actually was a school teacher for over 35 years in Chicago. So when we went to college, she actually helped foot the bill for the tuition. Now, we didn't have 529s back then.
No.
But she always said, I'm gifting this to you because of that power of education and how far this is going to take you in your lives. So for me, that really stuck. And I knew that when I joined JP Morgan, I wanted to join the 529 team to help families have that power of education, that gift of education, which a 529 can bring.
Yeah, and I'm sure there are so many families out there who are very grateful for what you do, and I guess giving a very good lesson to you at a younger age from your grandmother. God rest her soul. Let's start off with costs, right? So we all know college costs a lot of money, and college costs seem to have skyrocketed. And the statistics say that a public four-year school tuition and fees on average has increased 141% over the last 20 years. So averaging out 7% per year. And it's estimated that over the next 10 years, public school tuition would increase to about $19,800 a year, up to $38,200 for a private. And I know I've had clients who have called me and said, hey, Rich, this year's tuition is going to be up to $70,000. So it can get a lot more expensive. So anyone who has children who are looking to help in that education cost, they have several options, right, in order to help pay for that education. The first one is obviously paying from current income. We all know how hard that is.
Yes.
Most people have a set budget and they're not expecting or not planning to have to pay out of pocket for school. And it's also not really a tax advantage way of paying for college. Another way is to borrow that money. And when we're borrowing money, there's a lot of different options. One option is you could borrow from your 401k. Another is you could borrow from the equity of your house. Another one is you could borrow from parents, or you could even go through the financial aid route and try and borrow money from banks and hopefully have a nice interest rate because it's through financial aid, right? But the other way, and the most secure way of ensuring that you're going to have money for those children's college education, is to save for it, right? And that's what this conversation is going to be all about. And obviously there's options. And one option would be to keep your money in a savings account or a checking account. Very little interest. You're not taking any risk, and that money will definitely be there when you need that education. The second option is a uniform transfer to minor account, which is literally gifting the money to those children and hopes that eventually they'll use it for education, but when they reach age of majority, the law says that they can use it for anything they want. So there's no guarantee that it would be used for education. And then comes the 529 college savings plans. Let's talk about some of the pros and cons and some of the misconceptions that everybody seems to have when talking about 529 plans. And I always relate it to that, I guess the telephone game where one person hears it and the information slightly adjusts to the next person, and by the end person who's then calling me saying, I heard all about these 529 plans, but the information is usually inaccurate, right? Yeah. The basics. Yeah. What do you find is the most common myth and misconception families have about 529 plans?
Probably the most common myth that we hear is that it can only be used for college expenses. The good news is 529s continue to become more flexible. In fact, the federal government just tucked in some additional expansionary items in the last bill that just passed on July 4th. So the good news is it doesn't have to just be used for college. It can be used for vocational school, trade school, it can be used for apprenticeship programs. And now you have the ability to roll over a leftover balance into a Roth IRA. So I think the biggest myth that I want to dispel is that it can only be used for college, because it's even more expansionary than that, and including the ability to transfer to other kids as well. So if you do have a leftover balance and you might have other kids, you can simply pass it to them, which is great.
And I'm going to get into that in a little bit, right? But that you're absolutely right. So that's, I don't want to put money into a 529 plan because if my kids don't go to college, I'm going to lose that money, which is not the case, right?
Right.
So let's talk about that. What happens if a child doesn't go to college and you're a beneficiary on the 529 plan that you as the parent or guardian or grandparents have the ownership, the beneficiary is the grandchild or whoever's going to school. So that grandchild decides they want to become an auto mechanic or they want to become a hairdresser, and they don't need to go to college to have that career. What happens?
So even in the case of an auto mechanic or a hairdresser, they may have some expenses that they need to pay for, either through an apprenticeship route or a vocational route. And as long as it's considered an accredited school that's teaching them how to be an auto mechanic or a hairdresser, and there are a lot of those,
right.
The 529 can be used for their equipment or their supplies, can be used for their books. So can still
much
be
more
used in that
expansive
case.
than where it was when it first came out.
That's right,
Okay.
exactly. But to your question, you can actually move that leftover balance to another sibling. You can actually move it up to first cousin, and it's tax-free. It's a tax-free move, as long as it stays within the same family line, up to first cousin. So my nieces and nephews, I could transfer leftover balance to. I actually have 2 kids myself. I'm hopeful that my son Joe, who's 18 right now, does have a leftover balance after he's done with college, because then I can move his balance to his baby sister Kate.
Got it.
And use it for her.
Right.
And you also mentioned grandparents. You can move it down and use these as legacy 529s, use it for future grandkids. So we have a lot of families that are considering, I'm going to leave that leftover balance in there, because there is no age at which you have to pull the money out. You
Right.
can actually hold the 529 to perpetuity and continue to pass it down to different generations.
That's amazing. And as well as the owners, right? So I know there's one owner, but then there's a contingent owner. So if for any reason the owner passes away and there's a balance in there, the contingent owner takes over ownership, and then they can appoint a contingent owner to them.
Exactly.
So it's in perpetuity, like you said. So that's pretty amazing. And I've also heard of people say, hey, I got no other options but to put money into a 529 plan because I've maxed out my 401k, I've done all these other savings, and there's a lot of restrictions and IRS guidelines coming to that we won't get into, but those are other options, and that's great. And then I guess the last option is always to just withdraw the money, right? If you don't need it or you don't want to gift it to nieces and nephews of yours.
Yeah.
Right?
And if you don't do that Roth rollover, which is the newest provision, if you don't want, you can actually move up to $35,000 of a leftover balance, 529 balance, into a Roth IRA for benefit of that student. So this is a great way to gift a future retirement account for a child or grandchild if you don't need it for college or for apprenticeship or other expense.
Right.
But if you do take it out, there is a 10% penalty on the earnings component in the account, as well as federal and state tax on the earnings.
Right.
So I always say use that for last resort. We do have some people that actually name themselves owner and beneficiary and use the money for themselves.
Go back to school.
That's right.
Yeah.
They need to go back for their MBA or for some advanced degree, or they want to re-up some certification. You can do that for yourself. We actually had a grandmother go to culinary school overseas. So she made sure that the culinary school was accredited, then named herself as beneficiary, and was able to go back for herself to go to culinary school.
That's
so we
great.
love that.
Almost like a second chance, right? Or a second life.
Yeah, it was her love, and she wanted to learn a little bit more, and she had the chance to go overseas as well.
Great. Yeah. And so the next question is leading to when you can withdraw money or how to take it out. Somebody gets a scholarship, or maybe somebody joins the U.S. military.
Yeah.
Can you explain a little bit of what happens when to the 529 when that happens? Yeah.
So if a student does receive a scholarship, the good news is you can pull that equivalent amount out of the 529, and that is penalty-free. So you won't pay the 10% penalty at the federal level. The earnings, though, still are associated with federal and state taxes.
Okay.
So if you do pull that money out for scholarship, there is going to be federal and state tax, but only on the earnings component.
Okay, gotcha.
And that's because your principal, when you're putting contributions into a 529, they're always after-tax dollars that you're putting in. Your earnings grow tax-free.
Correct.
So in that case, just the earnings are going to be
taxable. So if you put in there you put $100,000 of contributions in over 10 years, and it grew to $200,000, the difference is $100,000 would be considered taxable if you backed out any kind of scholarships or enrollment into our U.S. Military, right?
That's right.
And I did have this come up once. There is a way of obviously finding out what that scholarship or I guess dollar for dollar what you joining the military would be about. Do you know anything about that, or?
So I know that there's a way that you can look at the financial aid award letter that you receive. In the case of a military school, they usually will indicate how much tuition would have been.
Okay.
That's free. You could pull that equivalent amount out.
Another common misconception that we talk about all the time is, 529 plans is only for the wealthy, right? And I don't think that's the case, obviously. I think if you could save money on taxes any which way you can and have money set aside for a future goal, I think you would want to utilize the correct tool, right? So what do you think when it comes to 529 plans and only being for the wealthy?
Yeah, so I think they're accessible and affordable for anybody. There is no income limit to buy in, so it's as little as $25 a month typically for 529 plans to start to get invested. So very affordable that way. There are usually 2 529 plans per state, one that's held directly with the state and one that's held with an advisor, where a financial advisor like you, Rich, could help guide and articulate what portfolios they may want to invest in.
Okay.
But yeah, very, very affordable. And like you said, those tax savings are for anybody. So within the state of New York, just as an example, there's a state tax deduction. It's up to $5,000 if you're an individual filer, up to $10,000 if you're married filing jointly per year, and anyone is eligible for that.
And that's on contributions.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep. So and that's great. So that's one of the things that we were going to talk about, which is the difference between making sure that if you live in a state like New York or a state like New Jersey or Connecticut, where I know there are additional state tax benefits, you would want to typically use one of the state-sponsored 529 plans. And for that reason is because of those income tax deductions on the contributions.
Exactly.
So there's multiple benefits here from a tax perspective. Number one, using a state-sponsored plan in the state that you live in, and it's only for not the beneficiaries and where they live, where the owner lives and where they file their state income taxes.
That's exactly right.
Right? So if somebody were to live half a year in Florida and they file Florida state taxes, which they don't because there is no Florida.
No income tax there,
right?
yeah.
Then they wouldn't be able to get a deduction on a New York plan if they're filing for the state of Florida.
That's right.
And vice versa. But again, the tax savings are on any of the earnings. They grow tax-free if they're used for a qualified education expense.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
which could be huge even at the federal level.
Right.
Absolutely. You're not paying tax on those earnings.
You mentioned the difference between a direct plan and a advisor guided, and one of the things that I've had in my experience is that I'm always offering the 529 plan, and that 529 would be if you're looking for getting financial advice or investment advice, you would want your financial advisor to set it up. So that would be in New York State through JP Morgan. And that would mean that I would have access. I would basically help people determine where they should be investing in that money. But there's a cost associated with that for some advisors who sell that versus the direct plan where I believe in New York State it's through Vanguard. They do everything. They set up their own account. The client does. They are responsible for all that stuff. So why would somebody choose one or the other?
So a lot of people want that choice. They're either very confident with their investment choices. They know how a 529 works. They know how those qualified withdrawals work in the future. But there are some families that aren't comfortable with that,
right,
where they get a little bit of an analysis paralysis, is what I like to call it. They
freeze in the frame, right? Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
They look at all the investment choices, and there are typically 3 different buckets, which we can talk to as well,
Sure,
that you can choose from. But for some families, they're not comfortable figuring that out, and so they don't invest at all.
Right.
And so usually that's where a financial advisor can help guide them and actually articulate what might be the best suited investment for them and their family based on their risk tolerance and their goals. And then, especially important, when it comes time to pull that money out of the 529, the advisor can help make sure they're using it for a qualified reason.
Right.
Some families kind of get analysis paralysis that way, or they don't know to take the money out of the 529 the year that they incur the expense. And they'll actually pull the money out 3 or 4 years after that expense was incurred. Well, that's actually a non-qualified reason that they would pull money out. So there's just a number of different things that families are comfortable with. Maybe they'd go the direct route, but if you needed that guidance, that's where a financial advisor could really help.
Right. And I always explain to people it's not only where you invest your money, it's where to pull it from and when to pull it from it. And there's a lot of consequences that, like you just said, you just missed the year in which your child just graduated college and you forgot to get a reimbursement out of the 529 plan. Now, moving forward, you're going to have to pay taxes and penalties because there is no qualifying event the following year. So that's a mistake that somebody's making because they're not getting the proper advice. And another thing is when you call that direct number, a lot of the people that you're speaking to on the direct phone number line are representatives. They're not able to give advice. So they can't tell you where to take it from. They can't tell you how much. They just ask to take your order and do what you ask them to do, right? So, yeah, and I've seen a lot of mistakes when it comes to that too. So I think it's really important to have somebody that you could trust who knows what you're doing to help you, guide you through it. And that's where that, advisor guided 529 plan will come through. That's great. So the other thing is when we're talking about the difference between state plans and non-state plans is there are other incentives, right? So you might choose to not have a state-sponsored 529 plan and go with a national plan. What can you tell us the difference between a national and like a state-sponsored plan?
Yeah, so actually every 529 plan across the country is typically associated with the state. And so every state usually has one direct sold and one advisor sold.
Okay.
There's a few states that actually have only a direct sold and they don't offer an advisor sold, but those are very few and far between. There are a few national programs, but they're typically associated with the state. I can think of one, for example, in the state of North Carolina, that's an advisory program that is considered national, but it's associated with the state of North Carolina.
Okay.
So,
and then if you do happen to open up the wrong state, right, and you open up a North Carolina plan because that's where your advisor sold it to you, and you live in the state of New York, you could still use the 529 plan. You just miss the benefit of the contributions being tax deductible.
That's right.
In the state.
That's exactly right.
But it still grows tax deferred and tax free if you utilize it for tax qualified plans.
And they're fully portable as well. So if you should ever move and want to move it from North Carolina to New York, just as an example, that is a tax-free event. You can do that and then have benefit of the New York plan and state tax deductions. So you don't have to stay within only one state's plan.
Okay, Great. So let's move on to investment options. Most people think that, hey, I want to buy NVIDIA stock in the 529 plan, and unfortunately, you can't do that. The 529 plans, I think, have certain investment options that you can choose from, but they're specific to that plan. There's going to be mutual funds. I know yours has ETF options, and then there's a money market and like stable bond funds. But you also have other options. So can we talk a little bit about the options that somebody might choose from? And I'm talking about the mutual funds or a basket of mutual funds.
So every 529 plan typically has 3 different choices for clients. They'll have an age-based option or a year of enrollment. The age-based actually invests based on the age of the student today, and then continually gets more conservative as the child gets older. So we'll automatically roll down what we call a glide path that way and become more conservative as they go off to college. So that's the age-based option.
And that's like the automatic option where somebody doesn't necessarily need to be going in there and reallocating because the age-based or the years till enrollment automatically does that.
That's right.
Yep.
Some people have that called year of enrollment, where you're investing based on the year that your student is going to go off to college, but similar in that it rolls down a glide path and becomes more conservative as they get closer to college or to future education.
Okay.
And then the second way is called asset allocation or risk-based models, and those are based on your risk tolerance. So if you want to be aggressive, you could pick the aggressive age-based portfolio. It doesn't automatically change over time. You would actually want to enact an exchange if you wanted to. Now, 529s only allow 2 exchanges per calendar year, and I think that's why people usually gravitate towards something like the age-based, because it will automatically shift over time.
Right. And is that considered when it shifts for the age-based, that's not considered a change?
Correct.
Right. Okay.
That's right. It doesn't count as one of your exchanges when it rolls down into more conservative portfolios. So with the age-based, you can typically choose from an aggressive, a moderate, and a conservative. Now, there may be some in between. And then the third way that people invest are what are called individual portfolios. And that's where they're actually choosing a portfolio based on either equity or emerging market, international, or bonds. So you can kind of mix and match to make your own model portfolio if you want to. Usually that's where a financial advisor will step in and help choose those selections as well.
Sure.
But that's the third way. And then the last way is something like a money market or a stable asset income portfolio, which actually allows you to have that principal protected. Usually people choose that when their child is getting closer to college and they want to have that preservation of principal. But lots of different ways that people can invest, and that's the general setup for every 529 plan across country.
And that's both with advisory plans and the direct plans, obviously.
That's right.
Getting back to contributions, one of the questions that I had on the contributions is client saying, you know what, it's too late. My son's going to school next year. I'm never going to be able to save enough. And I always explain, well, if you have the money, at least get the tax deduction. Throw it in for 6 months. You're getting the tax deduction, even if it's in a money market and you get 0.5% over the next 6 months until they go to school. Somebody can actually save into 529 plans up until that person graduates.
Yeah.
So even if they're in college already, you could still start saving and get some tax deductions and hopefully grow some of that money, right?
That's exactly right.
Yeah. So I think it's really important that, nobody give up on a 529 plan because you think it's too late. Obviously, the more time you have for that money to grow and compound, the better off you're going to be because you're using more of your gains to send your kid to college than your own money. But it's never too late. That's what I always say. Great.
That's right.
So one of the other questions or conversations that come up with 529 plans is how does that impact financial aid or FAFSA? And this is a little bit more complicated from me because there's a lot of new rules that have just come out, right, with the big, beautiful bill that we need to know about. So how do 529 plans impact financial aid? And why would somebody, be concerned about that?
So this actually is another big misconception that we hear from clients across country where they will say, Kris, I've heard that if I invest in a 529, it's going to hurt my aid package. And maybe you've heard that too, Rich.
Yeah.
The reality is if they hold it in a checking or a savings account or if they hold it in a 529, it's all going to count the exact same. It's only up to 5.64% of the FAFSA formula. Now, parents' income is actually the biggest driver of the FAFSA formula, and a lot of families actually get phased out of federal financial aid because their income is too high.
Right.
But in terms of 529s, good news is only up to 5.64% counts on the formula, very small percentage. And if a grandparent holds it, this is a new change.
That was the strategy I was going to, but go ahead.
Yeah, if a grandparent or anyone else that's a non-parent holds it, it's now 0% on the FAFSA. So really exciting news that FAFSA changed just last year. In fact, it got enacted. So for families that want to have grandma and grandpa open a 529, huge benefit because it doesn't count on FAFSA.
Doesn't count on FAFSA. Nobody sees it, and then you probably have a lot more grandchildren than you do children, right? And therefore, you have a lot more options if that one grandchild doesn't go to school, right?
Exactly.
Or needs the money.
Yeah. You can just keep transferring that balance to other grandkids too.
And then the other thing on that is, what if it were in the child's name, right? Because you mentioned 5.68.
5.64.
5.64, I was close. Let's just say that money didn't go into a 529 plan. Instead, it went into a UTMA account for that child. How much? It's usually about double?
It counts 20% towards the FAFSA formula when it's in a custodial
4 times,
account.
okay.
That's right, yeah. So what some families consider is moving that UTMA or UGMA money into a UTMA or UGMA 529.
Yep.
And then it actually shifts it from 20% of the FAFSA formula to that 5.64%.
Great.
So
and
that
once
could
it
be
goes
benefit.
into that UTMA account, though, it cannot be pulled back out and moved into a parent's account.
That's right.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah.
It is technically a gift to that child that you can never move. So you wouldn't be able to change a beneficiary in the case of a UTMA or UGMA 529. Always has to be used for that student or beneficiary.
Right. And I think that's one of the strategies of, I made a mistake. We gifted the money to the UTMA. I should have put it into a 529 plan. Well, great news. You can still shift it to the UTMA 529 plan and get that savings, I guess, back when it comes to FAFSA.
Exactly.
So that's a great strategy to know for anybody who's made that mistake, right? So one of the things that we discussed earlier was the Roth conversion. We said that was one of the options. The Secure Act 2.0 kind of updated us on what somebody might be able to do with leftover 529 plan money. And I know there's specific rules around it. It's not just as easy as taking the balance and putting it into a Roth IRA, right?
Yes. So of the 92 provisions, by the way, in Secure 2.0,
Yes, there's a
which
lot.
was very interesting weekend reading for me, but the one that got the most buzz, which I was thrilled about, is now the ability to roll over up to $35,000 of a leftover balance into a 529. But just as you mentioned, Rich, the federal government put a lot of guardrails around that.
Yeah.
And the big one is you have to have held the 529 15 years or longer. You can't roll over anything you've put in over the last 5 years. So what the federal government is trying to preclude people from doing is having an older 529 account, dumping a bunch of money into it, and then being able to roll that right over into a Roth. Can't do that.
Right.
So 15 years or 5 years for your contributions. And then additionally, the way to do it is to roll over for the same beneficiary on the 529 to the Roth account. So it does have to have like-to-like registration on both accounts.
Right. So the beneficiary, the child, has to have the ownership of the Roth. It's for the benefit of that child.
That's right.
Right. Okay.
Yep. The beneficiary also has to have earned income to be able to do it. And there's no income limits.
Okay.
So Roth IRAs typically have income thresholds. Not the case here. So anyone can do it, which is great.
Great.
But the way to do it is up to $7,000 per year. So it's very much like your Roth contribution that you're making for that year. It actually does count as your Roth contribution.
So the
you can't
child.
double dip. That's right.
Yeah.
But if you do that over 5 years, so 7,000 times 5 years, you'll hit that 35,000 max cap, and then you can't roll over any more from that 529. But again, really powerful way, especially for those families that may be concerned. What if I have this huge leftover balance? Now we have the ability to gift a retirement account for our children as well.
Right. And the last thing I will just clarify is that to do the $7,000, the child has to have $7,000 of income.
That's
correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's not going to be for somebody who's in elementary school who's decided they don't want to go to college.
Yeah.
I think my 12-year-old has told me many times, why do I need to go to college? It's like, well, because we've saved into this 529 plan. Damn it, you're going to use it, you know? But what I was going to say is that the child is probably going to be doing work after school, after college, or part-time work. Maybe he's a lifeguard while going to school. They have to have the income to convert it. In other words, it can't just be, converting it without the child having income. Okay, great.
And typically families do it when their child is 23 or 24, roughly, is where we've seen it over the last year, where their child has already entered the workforce and has a great job. And now they've got this leftover balance that they can't transfer to anyone else within the family. So that's where we're generally seeing those rollovers occur.
And do you think there's any other piece of information that you want to share with our listeners today about 529 plans? I just think they're such an essential tool. And anything else important that you want to share?
Yeah, so I think the other piece that we haven't talked about yet is the estate planning benefit of 529s. And that's something very special. It only exists within a 529 plan where you can do an accelerated gift or a 5-year forward gift is what some people call it. If you choose to do this, I say definitely work with your financial advisor or your CPA and tax pro, but you have the ability to gift up to $19,000 per child or grandchild, gift tax-free every year.
Right.
If you're married, you can double that. You can gift up to $38,000, but within a 529, you can multiply that by 5. So an individual filer can now gift up to $95,000, gift tax-free, and if you're married filing jointly, you can double that. So it's $190,000 that families can gift tax-free if they're married. We typically see this with grandparents that may have larger estates that are concerned about estate tax. It completely carves it out of their estate. And if they're the account owner of the 529, they completely maintain control of that account as well. So just a very powerful way for grandparents especially to have that power of compounding happen right away, have all those earnings grow tax-free outside of the estate, and allow that child or grandchild to have that gift of education in the future.
What happens if they start contributing, right? They're doing 95,000 times 2, and then 2 years later they stop. Does that just, can they continue the up to 5 years, or are there any restrictions around that?
So actually, when they're doing that big amount, you can do up to that amount. You don't have to do exactly that amount. So some families will chunk in a little bit over time.
Okay.
But it's actually their gift for that 5-year period.
Gotcha.
So they can't gift again to that same child until you're 6, where that window opens again, where they could gift again. So sometimes we see families do the $190,000 right now, don't gift again to that same grandchild for 5 more years, but then gift another $190,000 in year 6. So again, just a fantastic way to carve that money out of the estate and have all those earnings be tax-free.
The one thing that we didn't talk about, it was ownership beneficiary, the difference of, right? So anybody can open up a 529 plan and basically put any beneficiary on it that they have. It could be a friend, it could be their child, it could be a grandchild, right? And you mentioned it before, so I want to just clarify that. The person that puts that money into that 529 plan and is the owner actually is the one who controls what happens to that 529 when the money comes out and what it's used for, right? So,
that's right.
And that's really important to understand. The beneficiary is just somebody who could potentially expect to get that money and use it for their college education, but it's dependent upon the owner. So if it's a grandparent, to the beneficiary, make sure you keep your relationship going well. Otherwise, grandma and grandpa might change the beneficiary on it and take you out of that college plan, right?
Could happen. Hopefully
it could happen. It's that flexible, but obviously that's not what it's for. Let's talk a little bit about if anybody has any questions or how can they get some more information. I know JP Morgan Asset Management has some great public information on your website.
So JP Morgan puts out a college planning essentials booklet every year. Typically in the month of February is when we put out the newest edition. It's good for the whole year. And it has everything about the cost of college, financial aid, and FAFSA. We talked about the formula today. We've got some great slides around that. And then lastly, 529s and what is considered a qualified education expense. We've got a lot of great slides on that, as well as some information about different loans, the federal loan structures that people could consider if they don't have the 529 or they may have some balance that they need to cover. So again,
you guys do a great job, because you're not only talking about your 529 plan, but you do lay out in one of the booklets that I went through the difference between the 529 plan, the UTMA, a savings account, and how they I guess are basically treated after you put that money into that. So
that's right. Yeah, so College Planning Essentials. It's out on our jpmorganfunds.com website. It's also on ny529advisor.com, which is the New York 529 Plan Advisor website. And they can always reach out to you, Rich.
Sure.
And we'll make sure you've got the booklet as well.
And I've done a bunch of different seminars on this, so I'm very well versed as well, but I thought I would love to have you come on and talk to us. And I really, really appreciate you doing this. And I think it's a big topic of conversation, especially for those who have kids that are heading to college. Like I said, I have a 12-year-old, and I literally opened it up the day after. I was excited to, obviously we got to wait for the Social Security number to come in, which takes a couple of weeks after birth, but that was probably one of the first accounts I ever opened up for my son, was that 529 plan. And I've watched it grow. I've added very, not aggressively, but it's just done very well. And, when you have time to invest and watch your initial investment grow and compound, you're now using, gains to help you fund your child's education. And it's a wonderful thing. And you get some tax incentives as well. So great. Well, thank you so much for coming. I really do appreciate it. Any last words of wisdom?
The only thing I was going to say is
Yes.
It's a very powerful gift that you can give to a child or grandchild, that gift of education. Getting back to my initial story with Grandma and how she wanted to instill that gift, I know that a lot of families out there are thinking about ways that they can help their child, and I think this is just a very powerful, tax-efficient way to do it for a lot of families. So hopefully this helps.
Yeah, I think it will, and we'll let you know how we do if anybody calls in and asks about it. But as everybody knows, feel free to reach out to us, hello@enrichlifepodcast.com. I'll be happy to steer you in the right direction on what you might want to consider doing. And if there's any other topics of conversation that somebody might have heard in the crowd, or maybe they have some questions on, feel free to let us know what that topic is, and we'd be happy to try to put together a very informative podcast on that particular topic. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and share to all our social media channels. The more people that we share this information with, the better off everybody's going to be. You can reach us. You can find this podcast at EnRichLifePodcast.com. Thank you very much for joining us today. We look forward to sharing additional information with you in the future. Have a great day.